last week we looked at chapter 20 of 2 Samuel, and I mean, of all the, unattractive passages, last week we looked at some disemboweling, some beheading. We looked at some crazy stuff last week, and maybe right now, thank you, some of you are thinking, wait, it's going to get worse? Well, we're going to be looking at some other things. So in the paragraph that we finished with in chapter 20, we read about this guy called Sheba, who had gathered himself a small army and was rising up in a second rebellion against David. Immediately after Absalom's rebellion had been, ended, there's this other guy, this other usurper, this one called Sheba, who gathers a small army and then begins to start his own civil war right after the first one ended. And we do read that Sheba doesn't grab as much of an army as he hoped. He's not as successful as he wanted, and he kind of is retreating north, more and more northward up the Israelite geography. And he gets safety in a town called Abel Beth Makkah, and it's a walled city. And for those of us that were here last Sunday, we know that he's there safe in this walled city. And then Joab, the general, the commander of David's armies, comes up, and it says that he begins to build a rampart and begins battering the wall to bust a way into the city to go and to capture Sheba. And we see that there's this resourceful, wise woman who comes out, and she does some kind of negotiating on behalf of the city. And she says, listen, Joab, we know that you have nothing against us as a city. It's Sheba that you want, and we'll give you him. We'll give you his head on a platter if you just leave us alone. And Joab says, yeah, suits me fine. And that's what happens. And as we came to that passage, we talked about it, and I was talking about how I came across some writings by a 19th century Christian called John Trapp. And he compared God's discipline of his children to that unusual account of a battle that we see in chapter 20. He says that our hearts can be likened to that walled city, and that our sin is like that rebel Sheba, and that he's allowed to come in and find safety and security within. He says, a traitor that lurketh within. I like how he says that. But then God's loving discipline is that which comes, like Joab's army, and begins to lay siege against the city. And this siege, it's not like a blitzkrieg. It's not like this full-on bombing assault or anything. They're there just like, almost patiently battering against the door, waiting to come in. And John Trapp points out that God's hand of discipline is not actually against us, but it is his disciplining hand coming against the sin that we've given quarter to, that we've welcomed. And sometimes God, in his love, turns up the heat on us so that we will surrender, we will mortify, we will give up the sin that we've been allowing to live in our hearts.